Hello, everybody, and welcome to Celebrating Cinema. It's me, Tom. You're listening to a new series we're doing called Future Frames. In this series, we celebrate emerging Dutch filmmakers whose frames we're excited to see more of. As hosts, we've each picked someone who we'd like to celebrate and speak with. In this edition, you'll hear from 5 filmmakers and their personal relationship to cinema. This will be recorded in English with the intention to reach an international audience and present these talents from the Netherlands globally. For my pick, I have chosen Kim Kokosky, my dear friend. Welcome to our special Future Frames series.
Thank you.
This is pure nepotism.
I'm a Nepo baby. Nepo baby.
We need to get Nepo babies. Yeah, well, let's not talk about that. So we need to get out of the way that we've known each other for a long time. So there might be moments where I need to sort of take myself out of this conversation as though I do not already know the answer. So, Kim, the first question that I want to ask you to kick off this conversation is, what is your first cinematic memory?
I think technically my first cinematic memory was my first visit to the movie theater, which was an animated movie called An American Tale, Fievel Goes West.
Ah, yeah. The Dino movie.
No, it's the Mouskovich, Don Bluth movie.
Yeah.
It was the sequel to An American Tale, where they start in New York and then head west to the frontier. That must have been like my first memory in theaters, but I think my earliest memories of falling in love with cinema must have been Jurassic Park, which was like a year later.
Did your parents take you to Fievel?
Well, actually, my aunt,
Ah,
an aunt of mine, took me to the Fievel movie. Remember, we were in the front, the theater to the left.
that's a pristine memory you have there.
And she, I must have been like 2 or 3 years old, and my aunt afterwards, 'cause she was babysitting me for a day, and she told my parents, I took him to the movies, and they were like, "Oh, are you sure he wasn't too small for the movies? Did he like it?" And she said, "Well, he shut up the entire time, and he was on the edge of his seat, glued to the screen."
You were mesmerized already.
Yeah, but then when I watched Jurassic Park, because I remember my parents were both really curious if Steven Spielberg actually succeeded in bringing dinosaurs back, basically. And when I saw the movie, it was like the whole world just saw dinosaurs for the first time. So
So your parents took you to that one?
yeah, and I remember afterwards, because it was like a popular kids movie at the same time, even though a lot of kids still have a memory of Jurassic Park as being a scary movie.
Yeah, the lawyer, man.
Yeah,
I always remember the lawyer.
I was fascinated by the violence, actually, but I never had any nightmares because of just Jurassic Park. I was just completely blown away. I was just, mesmerized by the power that Steven Spielberg exhibited in this movie,
Right.
by basically bringing something to life that's been gone for 65 million years. And
So that's 93. How old are you then?
yeah, I must have been like 4.
Right.
Yeah. And afterwards, of course, because it was a popular kids movie, a lot of children's birthday parties consisted of going to Jurassic Park in theaters. And I just strategically sucked up to every kid that was planning on going to Jurassic Park so I could get to see it again. And they were also handing out these little rubber dinosaur puppets with each ticket back then. And at some point I was really close to having them all. So yeah, there was an extra incentive of trying to see the movie as many times.
Did you
as
get those toys where you could take the side of the
Yeah,
T-Rex
definitely.
out?
I had them all.
Yeah.
I collected them, obsessively.
So let's see, you're 4 then, because I'm interested in how was cinema a thing in your family, or was it something that your parents pushed you towards, or?
Well, it didn't push me necessarily, but it was a thing that people enjoyed on a regular basis in different ways. Like my father had more of an artistic interest in movies, and my mother was just like a grateful consumer of movies. She had a VCR. She recorded, because she is very thrifty by nature. She recorded a lot of films off of the television on VHS tapes. So we had a lot of movies in the house at all times. And I had one uncle who was kind of dreaming of becoming a filmmaker at the time, and he was really deep into horror and science fiction and special effects heavy movies. and he also made like little stop motion
cool.
films with his nephews and nieces. So there were definitely some people around me who could feed me in this obsession, but it was always mostly my thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like everything movie related that came into the house was immediately directed to my room, basically.
And because for me, as I said, I've known you for a long time. I think you are, in my mind, the biggest cinema omnivore that I know. Do you know how many films you've seen in your lifespan now?
I have no idea. I have made an attempt, because I do have an IMDb account. I have made an attempt of rating every film that I could think of that I have seen. I haven't looked at the tally so far. It must have been a few thousand.
Did that obsession started early on then, I guess?
Yeah, I was always like really thorough when it came to my obsession. So I immediately responded as a kid growing up in the 90s. I naturally really responded to like Steven Spielberg movies. And I immediately looked into anything he made, or anything that he had his name on, even anything with the Amblin label, or anything with the DreamWorks label later on, or anything where he was an executive producer, or he had anything to do with the production. I would like seek the tape out somewhere.
You're already a completist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was already really thorough.
Yeah.
When it came to Steven Spielberg in this case.
What was it about Spielberg?
I think it was, of course, easy to see that his movies are very accessible, especially to a kid. I think he has a lot of like childish wonder in a lot of his movies that do really well with the kid who also has like a very vivid imagination. And of course, he was huge at the time, so he was everywhere. So his movies back then were always like a really big happening. So I grew up in the right smack down in the middle of the Spielberg golden age, basically. And I think I just responded to his his limitlessness.
Yeah, in an interview with Cinephile, you said that what mostly attracted you wasn't necessarily like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, but the sort of freedom that it had in its filmmaking.
Yeah.
That it could just be about pretty much freaking anything.
Yeah.
Like sort of a very liberating experience in a way.
Of course, this it's not something that's exclusively special to Spielberg, but back then as a kid in the 90s, Spielberg was
your gateway drug.
Yeah.
But there's a path next to cinema for you.
Yeah.
And that's music.
Yeah.
Before we head into the I went to film school part of this conversation, was there a moment in time where, I mean, you're big into hip hop, you're big into like, we have a huge love for soundtracks. You were on this podcast to talk about Morricone, of course. Like, was there a battle in there for you when you were younger of choosing what creative route you wanted to take there?
Not at first, because when I went to high school and a little bit before that, because I changed schools a lot. Every few years, I was always the new kid in class.
Why were you moving a lot?
Circumstantial. First time one of our schools just closed down. We had to go to a new school. Then we moved, and then there was no space in the new school, so we had to wait in another school. I moved around a lot. I was like a new kid in class a lot during my childhood.
You had to prove yourself with those hip hop CDs over and over again.
No, but it was just like a certain like somberness and of course adolescence hit. This dream of becoming a filmmaker became much more unrealistic in my perception. And of course, I was still very like Hollywood focused, and it just seemed so far away. And because there were so many like frustration and depression pent up inside of me, I think I just, when I was like in my early teens, I discovered hip hop, and it was a much more direct way to channel this anger and frustration and coming of age, looking for maturity and masculinity while you're growing up as a little boy. So I just gravitated more towards hip hop as a teenager. And of course, again, I went very thorough with it. But then when I got like to my late teens, this dream of becoming a musician started to fade. I knew I wasn't very likely to get on stage because I kind of figured out throughout the years that it wasn't really my thing either.
So you could have become a producer.
could have, but I wasn't technically proficient enough.
But you were making stuff like
I
when
was
you were
making
younger,
stuff,
right?
but like very rudimentary. Like it was basically only sketches all the time. I was really good at finding the right samples, and I knew what I wanted to do with it, but I didn't have the technical
It's
proficiency.
like that one Dilla album. Like it was only outtakes.
It was only rough drafts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then in my late teens, like my love for cinema, of course, it never really stopped, but it came back to the foreground a little bit more. And actually,
Do you remember what you were watching then? Like around, because it's an important time in your life.
yeah, actually, I think it was watching Tarantino movies as a late teen that kind of brought me back. And not necessarily because I really wanted to make movies like him, but it was just because I figured out, like, during my high school years that I kind of missed out on becoming a filmmaker already. I knew people around me who were related to people in the film industry or who went to the film academy or anything and had been making films all throughout their high school years. And I didn't do anything like that.
You thought you just sort of missed the bus with that one.
Yeah, I thought I was already too late to try and achieve anything like it. But more and more, I felt like, hey, what if I just... Maybe it's a good thing that in the Netherlands, they still don't make the type of movies that I would want to see.
You were frustrated with what was coming out here.
Not necessarily frustrated, but I just still smelled some opportunity for me. Like, I was still like, hey, they're still not making the type of movies I would make. And when I saw how Tarantino did it, because it was around the time when Inglourious Basterds came out, I must have been around 20, I just realized, like, he makes movies the way I make music or made music at the time. Like he just got really nerdy with it. And I was like, hey, that's what I've been doing for years now. He basically gave me the confidence that I knew the art of stealing and that I knew
Homage.
Homage.
Yeah.
So it gave me the confidence that I could still maybe do this. Maybe there is a way for me to make movies. And then eventually I did end up submitting for the Film Academy.
You went for screenwriting, yeah. But were you already like looking at Tarantino from a holy shit, this dialogue is on fleek basis? Was it like...
Well, of course, that's like a first thing. I think the first year of screenwriting, of course, everybody wants to have like the fiery dialogue, showy dialogue even. But as you mature and develop as a screenwriter, it kind of wears off. You don't want to have showy dialogue anymore. When I watch a movie now and there's showy dialogue, it kind of throws me off a little bit.
You mean the thing that Tarantino does now?
He does, but there's a lot of screenwriters who get away with it or you have a great way about it. I just noticed it's more and more about character for me. I'm not that big a Tarantino fan anymore, actually. It's just it was just part of my own development.
I don't want to share a personal thing here, but I think we agree on the fact that when Sally Menke, his editor, died, something died in somebody saying, "This is enough, Quentin. There's enough dialogue here."
He lost his editor.
He literally lost his editor. Yeah. So you joined the Film Academy in what year is this?
2013.
2013. All right. So you are at that time.
I was 24 already,
which is old.
Which around that time, I was actually the oldest in my year.
I remember when I horribly failed 2 times to go to Film Academy. They always told me, like, you have to be older and you have to travel and you have to...
It changed drastically because I had the same thing.
You traveled, didn't you?
I did.
See, that paid off for you.
No, but it was when I was like 15, I went to like the open day Film Academy. And back then they said the average age of students coming to the Film Academy is 25. So I thought I would be average, but like within a week I found out that I was the oldest in the year.
How was that? Because there is, of course, a strange sentiment here that... Did you have the feeling that anybody had already watched as much as you had?
Oh, no, not at all.
Back then?
No. But that's a...
Did it make any... Did anybody care?
They did, but it was...
Not that it's something to boast about, but more like just to see like...
No, they think it's just a geeky thing.
Right.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions, because before I went to Film Academy, I worked at Criterion, which is a student-run
cinema
slash cafe in Amsterdam. When I joined Criterion, I was so excited. I was like, oh, there's going to be 50 people working there, and they're all going to be movie lovers just like me. It's just going to be one hotbed of movie buffs. And then within a week, I found out, oh no, there's only just one other guy and me. And so when I went to the Film Academy, I was excited again. I was like, oh, I'm going to be in a year with 80 people, and they're all crazy about movies. They all want to make a living out of making movies. This is going to be awesome.
Mm.
And it turned out I was the only movie buff in my year. Cinematographers, for example, they just want to shoot their own stuff.
Right.
And a lot of younger filmmakers generally are more interested in recent movies. They feel it's like too daunting to get into old movies. It's like too big and too fast to get into, like it's too intimidating or something. There wasn't really a culture of cinephilia at the Film Academy. And actually, when I joined, because at some point as a student, when you're already like in your second or third year, you can take part in like commission for admissions. Like the students that want to become screenwriters at the Film Academy, they pass by like a board with teachers, and then they can cool off with a board of students to process what happened during this interview.
Trauma help.
Yeah, and there was this one kid, he was like 18, 19, very young, and his favorite movie director was Billy Wilder, and he was really, it was like a young
Kim.
blossoming film buff.
Right.
So I was really excited about this kid, and when we had a talk afterwards, I found out that the teacher board, like the grown-ups, they weren't a fan of him at all. So I was all surprised, and I was like, hey, so why didn't you have him? He's a movie buff. You should get him. And he was like, no, we don't want to admit him because he is a movie buff. I got all upset when I heard that, and then I said like, hey, but you admitted me to the Film Academy. Right. And then one of my teachers said, well, actually we admitted you in spite of being a movie buff.
But why do you think that is? Why would that be a philosophy? They don't want people to copy or
Exactly. Yeah, he said like movie buffs tend to copy other movies. That's what he said, which I think is outrageously simplistically put.
I completely do not agree with this sentiment, but from what do you learn then? I mean, so from naivete arises a new form of art?
In my experience, people who haven't seen that many films are more likely to copy one particular film, actually. I see more copycats amongst filmmakers that haven't seen that many films, actually. Sometimes it's funny, like there was this one guy in my year who really hadn't seen any films at all. It was almost interesting how pure and not cinematically influenced he already was. And he at some point had this great idea for a comedy of a guy who wakes up and experiences the exact same day over and over again. And he was so excited about this idea, and he was like, oh, this is going to be a great idea for a film. And then I told him, like, oh, I commend you for thinking of this, but that movie already exists.
Holy shit. Okay, this guy wasn't Harold Ramis.
Yeah, he did come up with a great idea, though. But
it's still a cool idea, even though it is Groundhog Day.
It helps to know your classics.
Yeah. Did it help you about being there, or did it
being at the Film Academy?
Did this sort of
definitely
huge knapsack of film knowledge, or were there moments where you did have the feeling that you were a bit of an outsider?
Well, of course, I felt like a bit of an outsider, considering the fact I couldn't really get geeky with anyone in my year. But yeah, it did help me to develop a lot. When I was at the Film Academy, I watched as many films as possible, so I was constantly trying to diversify.
Also from their library, or?
No, I didn't need their library.
Only get your own stuff.
Yeah, I only got my own stuff. Yeah. No, I never rented anything from their library.
Because I remember that, I think that it was the years that you were going there that I was working at a record store, and we would always get the same questions for the same DVDs that sometimes we didn't have because everybody had to watch them.
Oh, yeah.
Because you had a watch list, I guess, there.
Yeah.
Pierrot le Fou by Godard was always on there.
Yeah.
Which was never released until Criterion ended up finally releasing it. I thought it was always really funny that There were even like films that you had to watch
Yeah.
that were not in the library of the Film Academy.
There is a list, and it gets like adjusted every year, just slightly. And all the students are expected to watch like a list of classics for.
And you saw
film
it and
history.
just said checked.
Basically, yeah. Of course, no, I hadn't seen like certain like really old films, but yeah, like I had seen most of them.
So you were at the Film Academy, working your way through. You're doing screenwriting. What is that process? Did you make Baardmos there? Was that your final?
No. Actually, I didn't make Baardmos in the first year.
Oh, you made Baardmos in the first year?
Yeah,
okay.
like in the first year, you're expected to do something like outside of the curriculum, get necessary points needed. And back then, a lot of people saw this as an opportunity to make a short film outside of school. And so it was, my whole crew got their credits from Baardmos, basically. And it was actually very randomly during class, like a class exercise. We had to think of a short story idea by opening up a dictionary blindly and then blindly pointing at a word in the dictionary and then pass that word to the person left to you. And the girl next to me, great screenwriter called Nena van Driel, had the word Baardmos. So, yeah, and then within an hour we had to think of a short story, and I came up with a very, weird sci-fi story called Baardmos.
Of a guy locked in a, what is it, space capsule?
A space druid.
Yeah, space druid, yeah, of course, yeah.
Living in a very isolated capsule, in the middle of nowhere in space, waiting for a delivery of Baardmos.
Oh, yeah.
Like a few days later, basically the heads of my crew walked up to me during the Netherlands Film Festival. We were all like outside sitting on a bench or something, and they were like, "Hey, Kim, do you maybe perhaps have an idea for a short film we could make this year?" And it was a production designer, sound designer, and a cinematographer who approached me with this request. And then I thought, I do actually have a sci-fi idea that would be interesting for the three of you, because technically speaking, that it's very exciting to young cinematographers and production designers to get to design such a thing and do it all from scratch. So I just pitched that idea to them, and then it became this horrible weight on my shoulder for 2 years because it took way too long. Like around the time when I released it, I couldn't see it. Yeah.
But isn't that what always happens with?
Yeah, but in this case, I was kind of done with it.
What were the travails of this space journey?
Yeah, it was basically just because we had like some screens inside of the shuttle, inside of the set, that we just left green. So CG the screens onto the set. And we were promised, because we had a different special effects supervisor at the time, he promised us that it would be super easy. And he said, you can just put green screens everywhere you want to have a screen, and we'll fix that in no time. And then it turned out to be much more difficult, because we had like a beard going in front of these green screens. It would go in and out of focus. Camera would move all around. So basically...
CG screen. Oh my God.
So that was awful. And it took a lot of manpower as well from these overworked special effects students. Props to them. Aaron Vels, Tommy Jansen.
Shout outs. Boom. So we spoke about the homage and inspirations and stuff like that. What inspired you for Baardmos? I'll have to say, before we head into the rest of your shorts and the aspirations that you maybe have for the future, is that the projects that you have made are very different.
Yeah.
There is a somewhat semi through line of some themes and some stylistic choices, but they are very different. Do you like pick different things from cinema history that you sort of absorb for doing these projects? And what was it with Baardmos?
With Baardmos, it was basically just a random idea that became more of a thing because of the team effort. Like, it was never something I would have done all by myself if it was my own initiation. Technically, I just try to make something different every time, because then I'm sure that eventually, like, the through line that you were talking about will
come to the forefront.
Will come to the
where
forefront. Where
it's Steven Spielberg's these parents are divorced.
Like the disappointing dad.
Exactly. Yeah, and the stare of a child. Yeah. You said the first year. So where does Ik Moordenaar then fit in?
Ik Moordenaar after graduation.
After graduation.
So when I graduated as a screenwriter.
Yeah.
And Yeah, my resume just said screenwriter, and I knew for sure that I didn't plan on staying a screenwriter forever. So I went by a lot of producers and production companies to talk about my possibilities of becoming a director, and like the consensus turned out to be you should make at least one more short film before we can.
If you can sort of veer into direction instead of you coming out of the film academy with the stamp, you are now a screenwriter for the rest of your life, writing for soap operas on the TV.
That's how Moordenaar came about. Was basically I knew that I wouldn't have a lot of money, of course, because I would have to pay for the thing myself. Well, we did actually try to apply to a fund for amateurs, but the fund thought we weren't amateuristic enough because I had a diploma. So I was technically a professional. I paid for the whole thing myself. So I knew production-wise, my possibilities would be limited. That's how basically the whole style came about. I knew I was going to shoot it in black and white because I would have more control over the color, basically. It was also a good way of showing that I knew how to frame a movie. Because if you're a screenwriter, they know that you can kind of create a narrative. People are also curious if you know where to put a camera.
Right. Is that the reason why there's no dialogue?
Yeah, kind of is.
Wait, maybe, by the way, you have to explain what this is about.
Because sorry,
otherwise,
of course.
This is what we always forget on the Celebrating Cinema podcast, is that we think that everybody has seen something.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. Moordenaar is a short film. It takes place on the Dutch countryside in the early 50s. And it's about a lonely little boy who walks to school and back every day. We're hinting at that he gets abused on either side, like at home and at school, so he's very lonely. And one day he kind of runs into this little impressionable boy who quickly becomes his best friend. But the anger and the frustration keeps mounting up inside of this boy, so eventually he abuses this friendship to get rid of his own demons, kind of. I don't want to spoil it.
No, exactly. Yeah, I wanted to say, don't spoil it. As you know, once again, in the pure realms of nepotism, it is one of my favorite shorts I've ever seen.
Oh, thank you so
much. And the stupid thing was that when you showed it to me, I think the hardest thing as a friend is seeing that somebody has done something really awesome, and then you have to tell them, that was way beyond my expectations. Like, it completely blew me away. It's so beautifully shot, and there are so many. With this one especially, I felt that I could, knowing you, really see the sort of influences that you put in there from the sort of Toru Takemitsu, Akira Kurosawa soundtrack things, with the clanging of things and the rustling of what is it? These strange. Yeah, meadows, like children running through it, and the whole sort of Japanese horror Onibaba kind of movie vibe that was in there.
Onibaba was a big influence on that.
Yeah. Also, I think what helps is that there is no dialogue. That there is something very ghostly about it in a sense, while it also being about war and about this sort of Lord of the Flies kind of children on their own. There's from outside of the world, you know.
I actually decided on. My editor, I had a first talk with the guy who turned out to be my editor, where he had read the script. One of the first things he said, it reminded me of Lord of the Flies. And I was like, you're hired. I want you. Yeah, because that was exactly what I was going for as well. That was also a big influence on Moordenaar.
I have the feeling that the response to this was generally very good.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it was.
Did it get picked up by festivals?
It did, not in a major way, but it did get a lot of love from the Fantastic Film Festival circuit.
Screened at Imagine, of course, the festival that we have here now as well.
I think it was selected 20 festivals internationally, won a few prizes for a film that was basically independently made and made for such a tiny budget. It did get picked up. It did what it had to do.
But the genre thing is, there's a through line in that sense then.
It's a very loving community.
Yeah.
They're very...
But it's funny because Moordenaar isn't necessarily, I would say, like a sort of fantasy or a...
Well, it has,
Maybe it has fairy tale qualities in a sense, but there's no fairy at the end of it, as though we're in Wild at Heart or something. I mean...
in a subtle way, it's a horror movie.
It's also the film that made me realize that digger's mentality you have towards music.
For Moordenaar, we sampled a lot.
Mm.
And sampled it in such a way that we didn't have to worry about lawsuits.
There you go. There's still the hip hop, the hip hop sampling
definitely.
there. Yeah.
Like we used like samples from this subgenre of library music called underwater library music.
Oh,
Which is like a subgenre where mostly used for like underwater documentaries in
is
Italy.
this Sven Liebach and people
Sven
like
Liebach
that?
made underwater library music. We didn't sample his stuff though, but he definitely is part of that subculture. Yeah.
We'll be talking about the other short, Hantu, in a minute. But in between, what are you doing? Like, are you're writing scripts? Are you like constantly shopping at production houses, or
No,
or
not necessarily.
Sort
After I graduated, of course, I went by a lot of producers that seemed interesting to me, just to introduce myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I did tell them that I was available as a screenwriter. Usually, they were more interested in using me as a screenwriter. Like the directing thing was kind of annoying to, to a lot of producers.
Yeah.
Like
We know about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're always saying, no, but we need more writers. We don't need more directors.
Right.
And, yeah. I ended up writing a few shorts. I ended up submitting a lot of things that never got picked up, that got rejected by the film fund.
Are there any in there that you? I mean, this is, as you know, the story of any filmmaker.
Most filmmakers,
of most filmmakers, the most things that you make at home never get made or make it to the silver screen.
Yeah.
Are there like things that in that period were there, like, or still, that you think like, oh my God?
Well, in most cases, you kind of move on. You try to get past it. But no, actually, if I look at what I was part of that actually got made, I honestly think the stuff that got made.
And these are things that you've written.
Yeah, that I wrote. Yeah, like I think the best projects I was part of as a screenwriter were rejected by the film fund, and I think in a totally just world, just by my standards, perhaps a lot of the things that I wrote that got made shouldn't have gotten made, and the other way around. But that's just how random it can be, and how trivial it can be, and how many different factors are part of the whole fate of a project.
Right. Sometimes thinking back about my own aspirations, like when you're younger, you don't even really think about the sort of incredibly difficult chain you will find yourself at some point in, where you are making something that you want to direct, or you want to just write a screenplay for, and then have it become a work of art, really.
Yeah.
And then in between that process, there are so many people and so many instances of hindrance, or different opinions, or different agendas even. Yeah. I can imagine that can be a very frustrating or maybe not frustrating, but a very...
Definitely frustrating, yeah. No, but actually, if filmmakers get together, in general, they're just complaining to each other the entire time about the way things are going. Even filmmakers that on the surface don't seem to have a lot to complain about, they definitely feel...
I think this is not necessarily something that is exclusively to young filmmakers. This is, of course, something that
anyone. Like if I meet like 80-year-old screenwriters, they're mostly still bitter about the 80% of things they wrote that never got made and stuff. Yeah. It's just rejection is really part of the whole being.
You have to get used to it.
Yeah, you do.
Have you gotten used to it?
Of course, in a way, you never get used to it. But I do remember, like, after I graduated, the first time I submitted something as a screenwriter, I submitted a short film with a director. We didn't get it. And a lot of people I knew did get it. And I felt horrible for like a month. I felt really, really bad. And I was like, oh no, this can't be it. I can't be having these kinds of feelings all the time.
Did you take it personal? Was it like...
Definitely. Yeah.
Right.
I got so... could have murdered someone. And I thought, like, this is not the way. I should really... Like, the first thing I need to do to maintain is to get used to this.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own ways. My ways basically of not being too involved with what everybody else is doing. Like if I didn't get it, I kind of don't want to know who did get it. For now, that's how I try to deal with it.
So we move on to Hantu.
Sure.
2021.
2021.
It is fresh in the mind.
Yeah, kind of is. Yeah.
Kind of. Have you already grown past it or not?
Definitely.
Yeah, there you go. Tell me what this movie is about.
Hantu is, again, a short film about a lonely elderly widow from the Dutch East Indies who basically spends her days cooking, listening to music, and calling her grown son. Every night she gets haunted by ghosts of her past. She doesn't want to burden her son with, basically the premise to the movie.
Haunted via the mask of...
Yeah, she has all kinds of apparitions
Yeah.
in her bedroom, and like the traditional masks that she has on the wall definitely play a part.
What I wanted to say is like, it's an Indonesian woman. Am I right?
Well,
No,
Indo.
Indo, that's what
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
to say. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I always forget what it is in English, but it's way easier then. In essence, these are aspects that you see haunting her. Like there is an Indo ghost, shall we say.
Yeah, it came from my experiences being Indo myself,
Mhm.
but like part of like a particular generation, the third generation of Indo people in the Netherlands. I had the privilege of being from a family where their Indo identity on their sleeve. Like everybody's
Mhm.
really proud of the culture and the heritage. And I do run into a lot of people of my generation with Indo heritage who are very unfamiliar with their own
Mhm.
background. And they usually lament it. Like they usually say that's because my Indo grandparents or grandmother or grandfather died already and they never spoke. Like they
Mhm.
were very quiet when it came to their past. So
And then it sort of died with their parents being fully integrating into the
Exactly,
Dutch
yeah.
culture, and then the ghosts of
Yeah.
their own culture sort of fading away.
Yeah,
I have the same thing with a good friend of mine who has the exact same problem with his Vietnamese background, where his parents almost sort of pushed their country away in a sense,
their
and became
like the country they came from and the trauma. Like they didn't want to
Right,
burn
yeah.
the next generations with this trauma. And we're like, no, we just want you guys to have a clean sheet and start anew
Yeah.
in a new country, which is basically what happened to a lot of Indo people in the Netherlands as
Mhm.
well. So you can kind of see it's like a fading culture.
there is indeed a lot of trauma there.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the theme of your film in a sense.
It is. Yeah.
Her mini trauma is in a sense like of course the symbolism for what that generation
It
is
is,
working
yeah,
with.
and to me, it's like in the movie, what's really central is how she tries to protect her son from it. Like she has kind of an affectionate but still distant relationship to her son, and you can feel it's distant because she doesn't want to go deep. Whenever he asks her why she has trouble sleeping, she'll divert the conversation
Right,
and refuse to talk about it, which is basically the dynamic of how these traumas are taken to the grave
Yeah.
by a dying generation
Yeah.
at this point.
Yeah, for me, it felt really familiar to what I know from my Jewish heritage.
Yeah.
Like, let's not talk about this. Here's some food.
Yeah.
And that's what you feature beautifully in the short is that her whole cooking, which is, I mean, mouth-wateringly good.
Yeah, it's escapism.
It's escapism. Yeah, it's
yeah.
like this way of, well, maybe not necessarily not addressing the trauma, but as you say, it's like sort of veering away from it in a sense. Let's stuff your mouth so you can't talk about it.
That's basically it, yeah.
Yeah, it's very touching, and it looks very different as well from your... Was that a choice? It's a very brownish film,
It's
if I
very
may say
brown.
so.
Yeah, I knew it was going to have a lot of earth tones just because that's how I picture this nostalgic sense of the Indies.
Mm.
Like if you look at all the old Dutch Indies paraphernalia, it's always
Wood
like very
carvings
brownish.
and
And so I knew that whenever we were inside of this woman's safe space, which is her living room, it was going to be very nostalgic and brownish.
Moving on, where are we moving towards now? What are you working on?
At the moment, I gave up on screenwriting for others, which I decided last year, basically. At some point, because when you really dream of becoming a film director, you can't help but feel sidelined when you're writing a screenplay. And even though I did really enjoy working with the directors I work with, and I consider all of them good friends at this point, it became more and more trivial to me why I was in the writer's chair and they were in the director's chair.
Why am I not directing this?
Yeah, but I never really felt like I wanted to direct their movies because I only wrote exclusively other directors' movies when it was their idea. I never took my own idea to a director and was like, hey, shall we make this? Because, I had an experience like that in the second year of the Film Academy where we had to, basically the screenwriting class had to give up their own their own screenplay, and then a randomly picked director out of their year was going to adapt it, which, with all due respect to the director in question, was a horrible experience to me.
And that ended up winning an Oscar.
Actually, from that moment on, I already knew, like, no, I'm never giving anything away in that.
Yeah, it must be a very fraught and weird experience to have something that is essentially your child then suddenly become adopted in a way,
and especially if you already have like so many. Because when I write something, I kind of already see the whole thing.
Sure.
I kind of hear the whole thing already. And if you have very, very, very certain and particular ideas about what you can do, it's just hard to see somebody else interpret that.
So now you're writing for yourself and you want to direct that.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm now working on 2 feature films at the same time, both not in the actual writing process yet. I'm still writing the treatments on both, and haven't really decided which one I want to start on first. Yeah, like I kind of really want to take a stab at trying to have a feature film made.
That's incredibly exciting.
It is, if it goes well.
It's daunting, I think. Yeah.
Because I already wrote 2 feature films for somebody else. And yeah, if you're in that process, which takes such a long time, just more and more you get the jeebies. You wanna do it yourself.
But did you have the feeling that at some point I would assume you wrote full-length screenplays or feature films during your time at the Film Academy as well, right?
2. We wrote 2. Yeah.
How different an experience is that from writing a short, apart from it being less pages?
In a way, it's much more fun, just because the canvas is much bigger. So you feel you have more freedom. I think writing shorts in a way is very difficult because it has to be so snappy. It has to be very minimal. I think one of the things, because I'm definitely not entirely satisfied with how Hantu turned out, for example, and that's mostly because it was so packed.
You wanted to express too much within a small canvas.
Too much texture, which made it, in my personal opinion, confused and busy, which I don't like. Kind of appreciate a certain minimalism and focus in a movie.
Do you see that back now in the features that you wrote now? Like,
well, they're still pretty packed and full of texture, but in a feature film, you have the attention from viewers longer. And, with short films, you have to take so many other things in account. Like, your movie's probably going to be shown along with 3 or 4 other shorts.
Right. Yeah. Well, you started the conversation out with like your interest in character, and I can imagine that it's very difficult to sort of express character detail in something that's 15 minutes.
Definitely. Yeah.
The arc needs to be minimal in such a way that there is still a character, but you can sort of express it within like
if a character has certain qualities, then you're probably just going to have one chance of expressing these qualities, of showing these qualities to the audience. And in a feature film, you can kind of slowly peel the onion, basically.
Peel the onion, yeah. Do you want to say anything about the features that or do you think that's like...
Kind of, no. Like, maybe in a very, very global sense, like one of them would take place on the Moluccan Islands, and would be basically like a social realist, magical surrealist story about... again, about generational trauma, generational silence. And the other is hopefully my own original spin on the serial killer genre. Whenever I make something, I really try hard to make something that hasn't been made. In my like how Tarantino once put it, he said, like, what movie wouldn't be there if it wasn't for me?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I kind of try to do. So I don't want to make a real serial killer film where I kind of know what's going to happen. I hope it's going to be like an actual contribution to the genre.
Are you then now rewatching everything from Silence of the Lambs to Holy Spider? Or?
Yeah, in a worrisome way. Like I've gone the deep end. Like I've been watching so many serial killer films. My collection looks troubling.
Anything good our audience needs to see?
Oh, so many. Oh man, wow. Yeah, like of course, certain classics the audience might already know. Of course, Angst. You know, like the Austrian
Gaspar
film.
Noé's favorite film.
Yeah, it is. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think Salo is his favorite film, but this is
true.
amongst
Yeah,
his
yeah,
favorite.
yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
He made a very disconcerting list from Mubi once, and I think
Yeah.
that they're like sharing the number one spot or
Actually,
something.
Gaspar Noé does do the introduction on the Blu-ray I have for Angst, where he advises the viewer to watch the French dubbed version because it's much better.
Probably the only version that he's ever seen.
Exactly. Yeah. That was the first version he watched. The first 100 times he watched that movie. Like, there's so many good South Korean serial killer films. Of course, I think they had like the most exciting contribution to the genre, like starting like 20 years ago. I love The Collector.
The Collector is such an amazing film.
I was talking about Richard Fleischer just because a lot of people know him because he made like Mandingo, and he made a lot of different genre films. But he actually, if you look at his filmography, he did make a lot of different great serial killer films as well. He made Boston Strangler was his, 10 Rillington Place he made. Yeah, there's a lot of great serial killer films.
You do have as do I, a love for like these filmmakers that are these weird. I always just call him Sidney Lumet because it's like that kind of guy, right? Like filmmakers who are at the same time very much just there to do the work. Does that make any sense? Even though they do have
a little bit like pre-New Hollywood, like right before pre-New Hollywood, it was the type of Hollywood directors that work fine, like in the New Hollywood era as well. Because Sidney Lumet is, I know. No, no way a new Hollywood director.
Or
he
Coppola,
was there 20 years prior already, of course. But
No, I had to think of this because I was reading LeMay's book, like Making Movies, and the entire first part of the book is mostly just him constantly saying the screenplay is the thing that I just make the screenplay into a film. Yeah, with these people, celebrate these people.
Well, of course, I do veer more towards auteur cinema, of course, just because I wouldn't say always, but I think I would always want to write my own scripts, which Sidney Lumet didn't do.
No,
but I do like I think it also boils down to like my own love for older cinema, or like at least 20th century cinema, is because there's a certain type of craft. Yeah, like an old craft.
No, but like old craft. I get that, but where do you? This is a really weird question, of course, to ask you. You are still in a sense the startup of your career, but where would you want to fit in this spectrum? Do you already have the feeling that there is like a through line in the work that you're making, or are you still really exploring that and in the way that you work, maybe?
Well, I hope that I will be making films for the rest of my life, of course, and I hope that I will keep developing. Like I do see a through line as well in what I've made. Like it usually revolves around lonely characters, or either mentally on the fringe of society, or they're basically outcasts. All three of my lead characters in my short films have been quite isolated. But I kind of hope that at some point that I won't be like the guy who made a career out of.
What does this say about you as well? Then?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe if I kind of look back at my career in 50, 60 years or something, then hopefully there will be, that was my family focused period.
Yeah, but still, he was an author, and it was like There is something which I find very interesting, and I remember like saying this to you like years ago. I was always afraid that you were going to leave Holland because knowing what you consume, like cinematically, I always thought like, oh, if you're going to try to make this over here, that's going to be really difficult. I do feel that things are changing slowly sometimes, but then again, I see the films that like really reach the biggest screens here.
The Dutch films.
And I think like where are like movies or filmmakers like like Paul Verhoeven or Dick Maas that did something with genre, but then in such a way that we as Dutch people could actually like understand it instead of it being like this corny horror thing that Holland is also obsessed with. But this sort of crossover thing, like in between, when I see your shorts now that you made, I still think that sentiment is that you're there in such a way. You are making those kind of films, so there is a way of doing that here. But I always have to, will you be leaving Holland?
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Actually, I'm really not planning on it. Actually, yesterday I was talking to my dad, and again he said like, "Hey, wouldn't you want to buy a ticket and go to Los Angeles just to see what would happen?" And I'll be like, "No, Dad, that's the worst advice." And I don't actually like. Also, just how movie industry develops, I'm not really interested in Hollywood anymore. Would have the possibility to make a film outside of the Netherlands. At this time, I would rather make a film in France or in Italy or Japan or Korea or something. No, I really want to make Dutch films. Actually, I would really want to make the Dutch films I would want to see. All my ideas evolve around Dutch stories, basically. It could be Dutch stories in former colonies or Dutch people abroad or anything, but still be like a representative of Dutch cinema.
Right. I find it really cool that you still hold on to that philosophy that I am here to, if I do not see what I want to see on screen from my culture here, let me be the one to
because I think
that.
it's also because when you want to make films, you really have to commit to a certain idea and you have to be confident about this idea. Like I feel, of course, it would be so much fun to make an American Western or something.
Right.
But first of all, so many masterful people have done the same thing. And what would you have to add? You know, like I see so much possibility in all these stories that haven't been told yet in the Netherlands.
Right.
I could still contribute something.
I don't think Martin Koolhof is listening to this podcast, so
I wasn't necessarily talking about his
There
film.
is, of course, something as another omnivore who eventually...
Well, actually, I have to say about Brimstone, I did like how he injected this Dutch Protestant flavor. Like he did add his own Dutch sauce, like his yoppie sauce. Like he, he did add like a certain accent. Literally to the film.
No, I mentioned Koolhof, and maybe some of our listeners will not know who he is. He is a Dutch filmmaker who is in Holland known as the sort of expert, the man who's seen everything, who started making films and who has made a number of films here and eventually made, as you say, an American Western. Because he was so obsessed with Viva Zapata that at some point he needed to make his own thing. So that's not what you will be doing.
Not necessarily.
Never say never, right?
Never say never, of course. But at the moment, I still really believe in like these Dutch ideas I have, and I really want to represent the Netherlands in that regard.
Is there anything that you want to share with our listeners? Is there maybe, because I can imagine that there are young filmmakers listening to this. Of course, you will say, who am I to give advice to these fellow students of the craft? But is there maybe an experience that sort of shaped your way of making films or your path that you're on now?
It's difficult because not very satisfying answer, but I do believe that everybody has their own path, of course. Like every time when a filmmaker gives advice, it's basically their own particular experience. I wouldn't know. Like I think filmmakers should really realize that you do kind of need like a complete package. I see so many aspiring filmmakers who kind of miss out on really great results by not knowing what their weaknesses are. Like some filmmakers have no taste in music, but they don't know. But they're so good directing actors, or they're so good with placing the camera, or they have such a great sense of tempos. They should know that their music choices are bad and that they're very close to making something really good, but the music kills it, for example. So I do believe like it's a total package. You should never underestimate any aspect of the story and any aspect of the movie making.
In a sense, you come back to the thing that LeMay writes so beautifully.
And you should know how to steal. But I really feel like I do get annoyed when I see filmmakers, even on the highest level. You see filmmakers who don't know how to steal. it's it is a thing.
Give an example.
Actually, a few weeks ago, I saw this Italian film. It was called L'odore della notte, The Scent of the Night. It was a late 90s dirty cop movie. It was very obvious when I was watching the film that the director probably loved Scorsese a lot. But the main character, he was in his shitty apartment. Throughout the movie, you see scenes of him, the dirty cop, in his apartment just by himself, thinking. The first time he was thinking, he's practicing whipping out his gun in front of the mirror. I was like, oh, that's a little bit too Taxi Driver-ish. And then, like half an hour later, he's back in his room. Now he has the television on, and he's pointing his gun at the television. And at the end, he kicks his television off the standard. And I was just like, no, that's too much. That's too much. This guy doesn't know how to steal. He just knows how to suck up. It's almost like he wants Martin Scorsese to call him.
Right.
He's not making his own movie. And then I thought of like how Vincent Cassel in La Haine is imitating. Yeah, exactly. Imitating Travis Bickle. And I was like, they should show these like in a film academy. They should show these two examples. Like, why is this good stealing and why is this bad stealing?
I always love the beauty of that shot in La Haine is that
it's
you
not
go
a mirror.
through the mirror, and I think that because of that, even though it's a trick that you don't see the first time you watch the film, you have the thing that you also have in contact.
Or you wouldn't expect it.
Zemeckis does that weird thing with the mirror as well, where you see the girl
when she
running
runs for her
then
father's medicine.
The first time you see that, you go like, what? But when you then know the sort of technique behind it, suddenly the scene has more sort of substance to it. And I think that is also why that stealing there is good. And of course, it's more funny because he's like trying to like sort of put a pimple out. Like, there's it's a different. Yeah, maybe when you steal, you need to inject it into a different experience.
There should be like an awareness, because I always think of because like the essence of stealing, to bring it back to making hip hop, because I always made sample-based hip hop. You should never, like Getting Jiggy With It by Will Smith is lazy sampling.
Yeah,
you take a disco
Pointer
groove.
Sisters, right?
It's the greatest dancer.
Yeah,
and like it's a proven groove that everybody knows already is a hit, and then you just loop it basically.
Yeah, and then you do it again with Miami, and you do it again with Men in Black.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it was the jiggy era, like the late '90s. This was in vogue back then. Like this was a way of scoring huge hits.
Yeah, before the Dionne Warwick law.
But they're in hip hop circles. All these hits are not highly regarded at all. You see in hip hop, there's this ethic when it comes to sampling that if it's very well known, you sample it much more obscurely, or you sample it in such a way that people wouldn't immediately recognize it or wouldn't be able to see what you actually did to the sample, even though they might recognize it. If you kind of just want to loop it or have it sampled be very recognizable at the same time, it should be more obscure. People shouldn't be able to recognize it because they wouldn't know it.
They don't know the original. Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily apply to my Taxi Driver beef with this Italian movie, but it was mostly because it's about the awareness. This dirty cop character in Scent of the Night, he's just imitating Travis Bickle, even though his character is not.
Right.
And Vincent Cassel in La Haine, imitating Travis Bickle, tells you everything to know about his character.
Right. Yeah.
He's a young kid, obsessed with movies about masculinity. He wants to prove himself. It shows awareness of the reference. And in this other movie, you're just imitating.
Yeah. Yeah, you're literally
imitating.
Literally remaking the film in a sense.
Yeah. So it should be a great lesson of stealing, because it takes me back to when, the teachers at the Film Academy said that they didn't want to have any movie buffs Film Academy. I don't know if this is still their official stance towards their students, but
maybe that was indeed what they were fearing.
I know exactly what they were doing, because I had a classmate who didn't make it to graduation, and he had like this obvious Tarantino fetish where every screenplay he wrote needed to have at least a suitcase full of drugs or money or a gun. Like that's what they're afraid of. That's what makes them flaccid.
Yeah.
But that's a very simplistic way of thinking, because I didn't consider this guy a movie buff in the first place.
Right.
It's I think you should just teach people how to steal instead of how much they should know, because I think knowledge in film is always a plus.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should always have like a pretty broad frame of reference with everything, so you have more possibility of what you could use.
I don't want this to be a plug for the sponsor of this podcast, but things do have become easier thanks to Mubi.
I love Mubi though.
Yeah. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a guest. Dear Mubi, we can invite Kim every time to do the sponsoring. No, but things have gotten easier in that sense for young.
Yeah, but you have to be curious.
Yeah, you have to be curious
because I know filmmakers who love a particular movie, and then they've been raving about this movie for years, and then after years I found out that they never looked up the director of this film and never looked up if he made anything else.
Right. Yeah.
Which is unfathomable for me. You have to be inquisitive.
Yeah, and for some people that's maybe harder than for others.
Of course, everybody has their own way of like processing information and their own diet. But I think they should be more inquisitive, because sometimes when I see like young directors who, for example, I will see last year a lot of young female directors who wanted to imitate Julia Ducournau.
Yeah, who made Raw and Titan. Yeah.
I think instead of trying to imitate her, if you're really fascinated with her, that's totally fine. I agree. I love her work as well. But you should just look up what inspired her. How did she come up with this stuff?
Yeah. Go watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, or go watch David Cronenberg. Be inquisitive. Mm-hmm. That's eventually, what you need. And you know when you look at art and art history, it's never the people who imitated like the recent successes. You're just part of like the ripple effect of an important movie.
That's no Renaissance.
No, exactly. Those are never the ones you're talking about. Like it could be same with music. If you're looking at these great Doors-sounding rock musicians from the late 60s, and you're like, oh, why didn't they make it big? Because they sounded like the Doors.
Maybe that's the advice that are now giving filmmakers.
Learn how to steal.
Yeah, and try not to sound like the Doors.
Also love the Doors. Almost as much as I love Mubi.
This is a beautiful note to end on, and I think we will have to pay royalties, because I will now say, by quoting the Doors, this is the end, Kim.
Tom,
I want to
my only friend.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Final question. What was the last film that you watched?
Fabelmans yesterday.
The Fabelmans.
I went to see the Fabelmans with my dad.
We are full circle. We are back to Spielberg with your dad. Oh, wow.
With my dad on a love seat in Tuschinski.
That's incredibly cute. Did you love it?
I actually really liked it, yeah.
Was there crying? A very important thing on this podcast.
I teared up a little bit a few times because I was with my dad. Let's not get into that. But
that's a whole different conversation.
But I did like the ending. I don't want to spoil anything, of course, but like the ending was one of the best end scenes I've seen in a while, especially the end shot.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for listening to the Celebrating Cinema series of Future Frames. Make sure you listen to the rest of the cruise conversations. Kiriko and Hugo and Sophie are all interviewing. So this is going to be a wonderful series. We'll be releasing one episode of Future Frames every week during March. Please leave a review on whichever platform you listen to so we can share with more people, and any reviewing, and hit that bell and like and subscribe and all these influencer things that this piece of text will now need me to say are very important for us, because they help us continue make this podcast. Feel free to send any questions and suggestions to celebratingcinema@lab111.nl and follow us on Instagram at lab_111. As always, we provide show notes including all films mentioned and links to the filmmakers' work at celebratingcinema.com. This was a Lab 111 production, edited and produced by Elliot Broom and Yvonne GC, with music from Hugo Emmerzaal and artwork by Studio FFF. Take care.